There in Duval.
at the Jaguars facilities. I guess UNF couldn't hold the practices and everything due to all the rain, but yeah,
Yeah.
it would have been cool to go out there, but
Yeah,
didn't go.
I thought about hitting Ross up and going
Yeah,
tomorrow actually, but depending on my schedule and what time they go, because I know they go early, so it's like
yeah, they go fairly early.
it's one of the things I wanted to do last year to go see like Ross and Kiwan and those guys just to holler at them and then just
Yeah.
check out some practice. But even though I
Mhm.
know they were doing a lot of special teams apparently today was so they're not really showing much. It's kind of just different
Yeah.
atmosphere, different thing, kind of a cool
It's
thing just
great.
to be able to
It's a great
great
recruiting
buzz.
tool.
Yeah,
Great recruiting tool for Florida State to get in the Northeast, Florida region and bring out some of the recruits. And, they're hitting it hard. I'm sure a lot of the Mandarin kids are probably out there, and some of the big guys around Duval, Northeast Florida, are out there checking out Florida State. Mike Norvell.
yeah. Trammell probably is out there. I talked to him last week. He's the
Mhm.
Florida State commit,
Yeah.
Mandarin's quarterback. He's been funny. He's been wavering a little bit, but I still feel like he's pretty solid. But he's taking some other visits and he's committed, but he's still gonna decide.
You
So
got to do your due diligence, man. You
it's
got to
one of
take
those
all the
funny.
visits.
That's funny. Well, he's already done all his visits, but it's just like one
Oh,
of those
okay.
things of he's still doing some like unofficials and like he's allegedly committed, but like I say, he's still gonna announce. It's one of those deals type.
Yeah.
But it's like, all right, dog, you got it. But yeah, Florida State. Hashing back to last year, we they had a really good team last year. They
It really
obviously
did.
they had a ton of guys get drafted. They had some star players.
Mhm.
And then they kind of got the injury bug bit them in the worst way possible with losing Jordan Travis in that meaningless like South Alabama game. And it kind of turned their entire perfect season on its head. And, for whatever you want to say, bad luck, they got screwed. Uh, they probably did. But like we argued back and forth and with other
Mhm.
people who are Florida State fans is, that FSU team just wasn't going to be the same going down those last 2 or 3
No.
games. And what ultimately happened, I think, was the fact that they just felt like a team without Jordan Travis, who led them to that undefeated record, wasn't going to be a team that was going to be able to compete in that Final Four. And I think that's ultimately what it came down to.
Yeah.
Yeah, did it suck? Sure. But I mean, it is what it is, So they had all the opt-outs in the bowl game, get blazed up by
Mhm.
Georgia. Steve Berg still tells us that if they would have played all their players, they would have beat Georgia. I don't know what he was smoking
Not without
still.
Jordan Travis. If Jordan Travis is playing, it's
I would
clearly, like you
I
said,
would have
Jordan
loved
Travis
to
plays
seen it.
is yeah, those last 3 games, they're in the playoff. They're going against the big boys to show what they could do. But without Jordan Travis, I just didn't see it happening. And I don't care what anyone says about, oh, their defense could keep them, but you still got to score points at the end of
Yeah,
the
I
day.
mean, dude, they looked, in my opinion, they looked horrible against Florida and Louisville.
Yeah.
And the Gators, like we said, was terrible last year.
Yeah. And they got the job
If
done, and
Graham,
they
yeah,
won the ACC
if
championship.
they got the defensive, the big interception in
Mhm.
that Louisville game late. But if like, Mertz plays in that game, it might be a different story. And then FSU's got the one loss or whatever. But again,
Yeah.
they found ways to win all those
Yeah.
games
Exactly.
without Jordan Travis. But I think when it was all said and done, they were like, is this Jordan Travis-less team going to beat a Michigan? Are they going to beat a Bama?
Right.
Are they going to would they beat a Georgia, who didn't even get in the playoff themselves, So
Right.
like I say, I'm not, I know we're not here to beat the dead horse about all that. Like it
No.
is what it is.
That was last year. We got to move on to this year.
He got hosed. Hell, die
Yeah.
on your mountaintop, Florida State fans, and say, we would have won it all. Go ahead. Because that's all you can say. And we'll never know because you didn't get in there. So
Right.
it is what it is. We're
Mhm.
turning the page on that and moving on to this season. Because like I say, you've got first of all, we'll start off with, replacing what they lost last year. And this is going to
It's a
be,
lot
in
of
my
guys.
opinion, the biggest aspect of how good Florida State can be. When you talk about losing Jordan
Yep.
Travis, when you talk about losing your leading rusher and Trey Benson, when you talk about losing those 2 receivers in Keon and Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, then you just flip it over to that D line, losing, Jared Verse, who's been the beast for
Mhm.
them, Fisk, the corners, the guy, like
Fabian Lovett, Deloach.
they lost 9 guys who are now going to be playing in the NFL.
Yeah.
Florida State hadn't had that in a while where they've lost
Right.
NFL caliber talent
Right.
in the last several years. And, that's good recruiting. That's Norvell getting those guys in there. Kudos to them. So now you're in the duty of replacing all that. So that's going to be the big question
Mhm.
mark, in my opinion. And granted, Norvell did another good job of hitting the portal and bringing some guys in.
Right.
But are these guys going to mesh? Are they going to be did he get the right
Ex
guys? And so
Well,
that's the big question.
that's the biggest thing. That's always the biggest question when you're flipping the roster. Can they buy into your culture? I mean, you talk about Jared Verse and Braden Fisk and those guys coming in as transfers last year, but I think you pretty had a solid core that was there when you brought all those guys
A lot
in.
of those guys, were 2-year guys though too. Like Keon was a new guy, but
Exactly.
those other guys were 2-year guys.
Right, and then JT was there for a couple years because remember the
Right.
whole moving on the
He's
receiver and all of
yeah,
that.
he's been
So
there for a minute.
flipping your roster every year because even Miami's going to run into it. Flipping your roster every year, do you have those core guys to keep it going? And what you don't want during the middle of the season is some of these guys that come in for a year. I'm not bought in. I'm just here. I got the bag. I'm on a good team. We're living off
Yeah.
of last year. Don't want to show up to play. Don't want to show up to practice. And then next thing you know, they're just like, I'm not even playing anymore. I got my bag. I'm ready to go to the league or whatever. So, but I think has that infectious attitude. He's a great recruiter. You got to give him credit. He's a great coach because 3 years ago, we were saying something totally different about him. But, to get those guys coming in, can he get DJ to buy in? That's going to be the biggest thing. The defensive line, they're still pretty solid when you got Josh Farmer and Daryl Jackson and Patrick Payton. Patrick Payton stayed because remember
Yeah.
the
He
year
was talking about transferring. He was talking about
talking about
going pro.
transferring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, see, I think too. Here's the thing: they brought in some big time names that
Mhm.
were like 4- and 5-star guys at other big time programs like Bama and Georgia.
Yeah.
But here's where it is for me: they're bringing in guys who are still unproven because they
Yeah.
didn't do anything at those places too. Now, don't get me wrong.
Right.
This is where we get to find out if when the rubber meets the road, if these guys are legit 4- and
Yeah.
5-stars. I'm talking about
Mhm.
the Marvin Joneses. I'm talking
Yep.
about the Earl Littles. I'm talking about
The Roydell
the
Williamses, the
Roydell
Cam
Williams.
Rileys.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Malik
Malik
Benson.
Benson. Yep.
Exactly. So those guys were all coming from like Bama and Georgia, big time guys. They were big time recruits. So now,
Mhm.
but they didn't do anything really at those previous spots. Now
Right.
you're going to be thrust into you're a starter now, and you're expected to replace the Keon Colemans and the Jared Verses of
Right.
the world. So that's where it's going to be the question mark of how quick they can do that. And then,
Mhm.
like I say, the major piece is the quarterback play,
DJU. Yeah.
that's where the question mark is. How good is DJU? Is he the guy that we saw, at the early stages at Clemson? Is he the guy who, took
Mhm.
over after Trevor left? Is he the Oregon State quarterback from last year? Where does he need to be? What does he need to do?
Right.
And that's the big question mark.
Well, also what you got to put in there. Usually, when a guy's in college that long, he's gone to 3 colleges. There's a lot of red flags. Like, why is this guy gone to 3 colleges at the quarterback position? By this point, most of those guys are heading off to the NFL and
Yeah,
getting ready. Or you're a Carson that's been sitting behind for a little while, and
right.
then you want to inch up that draft board like a Cam Ward and those guys. But with DJ, it's intriguing. I've been a fan of DJ,
Yeah, I was
but
about to
the
ask you
only
what your thought was, or how you liked him.
I like DJ, but I felt like the Oregon State offense fit his skill set, pro style, hand the ball off to a Martinez, get it to Silas Bolden and those guys at wide receiver. Now with this offense, it's a little wide open. I mean, there's still some principles in the Florida State offense, but when everything breaks down, he's not as elusive as a JT at quarterback, but he'll run a
No,
guy over. And
right.
then, like you name off you lost what 95% of your production at wide receiver and tight
De-
end,
Definitely,
and
definitely.
now you got studs
Yeah,
allegedly,
you
coming
got
out
some
of high
young.
school.
Yeah, you got some young stuff like Hakeem
Mhm.
Williams. Like that guy was like,
Yeah,
everybody wanted him.
yeah,
So it's time for you to show up, big fella. You're a 5-star receiver,
yeah.
and you caught 5 balls last year.
I
So
mean, Spain's going on what year 9.
yeah, he's
I
been
mean,
there
you got
for.
Douglas. I mean, you got a lot of guys that have been there. They've been in the program,
Yeah, Ja'Kai
but I
Douglas
mean,
had a nice season last year.
yeah. I mean, he
Came
was
on
the
strong.
3rd guy, but can he
Right.
step up and be the guy?
Yeah.
So for me, starting off the season, who's going to be that guy? Who's going to be the Keon Coleman when it's time to make a big catch? They're going to be the explosive player. Who's going to be the Johnny Wilson, the Jaheim Bells? Their tight ends are coming back. Their tight ends are pretty decent, but they're not vertical threats or anything. So it's all going to be how do you start the season off with that offense. Their offensive lines pretty much return, I think, majority of their guys, except for one or two guys. And
Yeah.
then their backfield is loaded. I love their backfield. With Roydell Williams, you still got Tia Foley coming back, and
Yeah,
then the freshman Cam Davis.
he looks like a beast. Cam Davis is a effing man, dude.
Yeah.
I've seen Cam Davis in the 7-on-7 circuit for the last like 3 or 4 years when he was like a
Not
ninth
even
grader.
fair.
When he was in ninth grade, I'm looking at this kid like, God dang, this kid looks fully grown man,
Yeah.
and he was only in high school and
Mm-hmm.
he ripped. Now, can he run it is the next question,
Yeah.
So,
And then Landon Thomas at tight end coming in as a true freshman.
yeah. No,
Those are the guys that are going to have to step up big time.
yeah, no, put it this way. I've actually always been a DJU fan. I follow obviously recruiting in high school, a lot. And what's crazy is I'll never forget going into that Army All-American game. It was Bryce Young versus DJU, the two California boys playing in that Army All-American game. And it was just like I knew Bryce Young was legit, and I saw DJU a little bit in high school. And I was talking to Ross the other day, and he was telling me that he's looking good out there. And I was like, I've always been a DJU fan. I felt like his game, you want to know who it reminded me of? Ben Roethlisberger. I was like, this guy's Ben Roethlisberger of high school football. And I'm like, he's just big, strong, can throw it a country mile.
Yeah.
Where's his accuracy maybe a little off and stuff like that. But, he gets thrust into action when, Trevor, would he have COVID or whatever? And, he threw for 439 yards against Notre Dame. Now they lost the game in double overtime, but that was the number 4 ranked team in the country on the road.
Yeah.
And he threw for 439, 2 touchdowns with no
and
turnovers.
And if you need 2 or 3 yards, he could pick it up on the ground as well.
Exactly.
Big physical guy.
Exactly. Yeah. He had a rushing touchdown in that game as well. But when I was talking to Ross, and this is what happened, I think, we just looked at Clemson as they, that was kind of at the end of the national title runs with Deshaun and Trevor, and then DJ is just going to come in and it's going to be the same
Take
thing.
Over
well,
and be the guy.
Here's in my opinion the biggest problem, and we've talked about this with Clemson, is Dabo's recruiting. Like the skill guys were not there for DJU like they were there for those previous guys. No. I'm talking about that game he got inserted into. He still had Travis Etienne. He still had some of those guys that were still on some of those Trevor teams. He had the Cornell Powell and the Marty Rogers was still there. But as soon as he had to take over the next year, who's his running back? A freshman, Ricky's favorite guy, Will Shipley. Yes,
and that's a lot to throw on a freshman to come in that offense.
Then you throw in some of the other receivers. You had a aging, hurt Justin Ross was the leading receiver that year.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think the combination of he didn't have anybody to throw to, so Clemson kind of took a step down, and then yes, he did not have a good season at all. He couldn't propel them to victories that that everybody just assumed was going to happen, and then it just kind of didn't. It worked itself away from not working out. He goes to Oregon State, kind of revitalizes the career a little bit. I think Oregon State kind of, like you said, maybe fit his mode, but then again, think about it. He didn't have true, legit big dog receivers like you do at some of the powerhouse schools.
I like the guys they had. I think he just got unlucky. He played it in a loaded Pac-12 last year.
That too.
I think the Pac-12 was the best conference in the country last year.
Yeah, top to bottom. I think they were too.
Yeah, exactly. So when you think about it, like I say, Silas Bolden, who left and went to Texas, their coach leaves and goes to Michigan State. Their running back leaves and goes to Miami. And, they lose other guys in the transfer portal. One, why would he stay? So he had guys, but when you're playing against Oregon, Washington, even SC, out there in the Pac-12, it was murderer's row last year for, I think, Oregon State. I think they did enough, and, they won enough games. He's good enough to help that Florida State offense. But when you don't have guys to throw, unproven guys to throw the football to, it's going to be a struggle to start the season off. And then first game of the year, you're going against Georgia Tech in Ireland. So
yeah,
you're gonna have to work the kinks out.
I feel like that. I feel what's crazy is that's one of those everybody talks about, like scary games or whatever to open with. Yes, they're better than Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech is not like the slight. And that's game one. You're in a weird travel. It's just kind of that. Georgia Tech had pretty good offense as the year went on later in the year. Now the question is if Georgia Tech's offense is clicking, who knows? You might get a shootout game. You might get a tighter game than what you expected. But I still feel like Florida State's the better team, but it's
Talent
not.
wise, talent wise, they're better.
And the thing about it is, I still look at FSU's schedule, and it sets up for them early, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I know I was listening to somebody on the radio. They were talking about, I think it was like an Atlanta Journal-Constitution guy on the radio saying that Georgia Tech will be the surprise team in the ACC. And then they talked to somebody the next week, and they were like, Boston College is sneaky good with that offense they got, and their second-year quarterback, the kid from UCF,
Castellanos.
he's from up in
Yeah.
Georgia. Where is
Well,
it?
he's just. I just think he
Wayne
just brings.
County.
I think it's just a dynamic he brings where he could throw and run, and majority of the time he's just going to scatter. If you're
Well,
not
like I
paying
say,
attention, he'll get out. And they gave Florida State a hell
it
of a
gave him
game
fits
last
last year.
season.
It did. So,
Yeah.
so like I say, now the question are we just looking at those teams like we always do? It's Georgia Tech and Boston College, you know.
Well, for me, I think week one might be a little Florida State fans will jump all over you and be like, oh, we should win Georgia Tech. But when you're breaking in a new quarterback and new receivers, it's a lot timing and everything. So the biggest thing for them is not to get behind and let Georgia Tech stay in the game. I mean,
Right.
Haynes King comes back, so Georgia Tech has their quarterback back and a lot of their skill guys. But man for man, of course, Florida State's the better team.
Yeah.
But like I say, breaking in a bunch of new players on offense week one, that defensive line is going to have to get off, which another year, I love their defensive line. Their two defensive tackles are just men, grown men playing in the middle. And the offensive line, and I expect Mike to be creative with the run game. When you have that many running backs, you just gotta roll those guys in and just say, you know what, we're just gonna beat you up and then we'll figure out wide receiver and whatnot.
Yeah.
So
Like
that's what I expect week one.
Yeah, and then they get 3 home games. You know, we said Boston
Mhm.
College right after that. You know, then they're playing Mike Norvell's previous team, Memphis, and then they're
Mhm.
getting the 2 weird games. Cal is coming all the way from
Mhm.
California to play in Doak Campbell, and then they go on the road to Dallas and play
Dallas.
SMU. You know,
So stop right there for a second
yeah,
on the SMU game. I think the SMU is going to be one of those teams I'm very intrigued to see this year. I might have them as one of my sleeper teams this year. The only thing about SMU that makes me intrigued to see and what I'm waiting as they play are their lines of scrimmage any good?
yeah,
Because when you're moving from what conference they're moving from to the ACC, you still, I know everybody says the ACC isn't as good as the SEC and the Big Ten, but
they
you
still
still
got
got to have
dudes.
those lines of scrimmage. But
Yeah, they still got dudes.
SMU has those skill guys. They have a plethora of skill guys,
Yeah,
and Rhett Lashley and Rob Likens offense. They're going to put up points,
yeah,
and
they're recruiting from Texas right there, so you know
yeah,
they got good dudes. And you look at they went 11-3 last year. SMU
yeah,
did
they got
lost
a
to
ton of Miami guys
lost to
at their skill
Oklahoma,
positions.
lost to TCU, and then they lost the bowl
Hmm.
game to Boston College. So
Yeah,
they
returning
that definitely
quarterback.
it'll set up however they roll with those for if they're
Yeah.
4-0 going into that game, which I would
Oh,
assume
I'm
they
not
will.
saying SMU
Yeah,
is
no,
going to win by
yeah,
far. I'm
no,
not
but
saying that, but
but like I said, that
it's
could be.
intriguing.
It's intriguing, and you just
Hmm.
played 3 home games after the road
If
trip to Ireland,
if you get into a
and
shootout, can you score enough
it's
points?
and here you go. It's the week before Clemson too, so it's
Yeah,
like that's where ultimately I think when I look at the schedule, I feel like FSU has a 4-game schedule, in my opinion, 4 games
I
that
agree.
are like kind of like toss ups, or they're going to be in bangers with the 2 rival games against the Canes and the Gators, and then obviously
In
Clemson,
Clemson, yeah,
and then at Notre Dame. Those
yeah.
are that's your basically your schedule, and I think Vegas has this thing pegged, man. 9.5. It's tough because
Yeah.
I definitely see him winning 9. So then it comes down to, do you lose any of those 4 games that we just talked about?
I
You
mean,
probably beat the
The
Gators.
Carolina game may be a tough game, but I don't see it without a
Well,
quarterback.
we'll have to wait and see what Carolina does because that's a
Yeah,
later game.
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think Vegas has it pinned where it's like, it's tough. I would say they'd probably go
They
at
should have
10.
10 wins. They should
Yeah,
have 10.
that's where I would peg it right
And
now.
yeah, going into the season, but like I say, they have so many question marks and can they move the ball and who's going to step up at wide receiver? Because at some point, even though, like you say, the first 5 games, they should be able to, you would think, line up and run the ball at those guys and say, we're just going to run the football. But
I
at
mean,
the
but
end of the day, you still got to
yeah,
score points.
I agree. But
And the
I'll go ahead
defense,
and I'll go ahead and put my prediction out. They're going 8-4, baby.
I mean, I
L to
could see it.
Clemson, L to the Canes, L to Notre Dame, and L to the Gators. Yeah, Ricky, how about that?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, those road games are going to be tough. Who steps in? I mean, their weakness on offense is going to be wide receiver, apparent
Yeah,
clearly, and then on defense, replacing two veteran linebackers in your secondary. Like I say,
yeah,
that defensive line, they're going to have the. I don't know about their second rotation coming in, but I know the first four on the field are going to be pretty good. I mean, Marvin Jones still has to prove can he
right.
play.
Exactly.
You
No,
know,
for
we know
like
Patrick
I say,
Payton could play. We know
losing
Daryl
losing a
Jackson could play.
losing to Jerry and Jones, losing
Yeah.
Renardo Green, losing
Mhm.
Greedy Vance hit the portal on him.
Mhm.
So those are three legit corners. Now I love Thomas, the safety from Niceville. He's been a baller for them.
Yeah.
But I just feel like that's a tough spot when you're
Akeem Dent.
secondary.
Yeah.
Right. So like that you lose those guys in that back end. Now the question is, name a high powered offense besides, like you said, maybe SMU, to where they can
Exactly.
get exposed. Like you're not going to
Yep.
see
In the
high
first 6
flying.
games. No.
Exactly. You're not going to see, because even Clemson, we've talked about how Clemson,
Mm-mm.
they don't have any legit like
No.
weapons like they've had in
I
the past.
I
So
think they're just getting credit because it's Dabo and they got their court Cade Klubnik is back.
yeah,
I like Massa, the running back, but who
yeah.
the hell is he throwing the ball to? And,
No, that's the biggest problem.
at what point does the administration at Clemson tell him like, "Yo, man, you start taking in transfers. You can't shun the transfer portal and expect to be in the top 5, top 10 every year and just doing it off of high school kids." It's
Yeah.
one thing if it was 6, 7 years ago where you're still rolling in those guys, but they're not rolling in those guys like they used to.
No, I agree. I agree. They and like I say, we'll talk about Clemson as we get into more of the national thing,
Yeah,
but yeah, definitely, you know, they don't have the weapons they've had before. So again, you look at the schedule,
yeah.
okay, where can this young
Mhm.
secondary or this new secondary get
Get
tested? And
picked off. Yeah,
you just don't, I don't really see it for a while, or if at all, so the
yeah.
Canes, maybe Notre Dame, obviously, will
I
help
got them.
Florida
I
as
got them
teams
right
also.
at 10. I got
Yeah,
them right at 10.
yeah, like I say, that's probably where I'd put them at
Yeah,
too. I'd put
because
them
I mean,
over.
your tougher games are on the road for the most part, other than
Yeah,
the
they got
Clemson game when
yeah, they
you're at
got two.
home.
Yeah, they go to South Bend, and they got to go down to Coral Gables.
Like you say, the Ireland game, most people say, "Well, it's a neutral site game."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
you got to fly across the pond.
yeah. I asked Ross. I was like, Ross, you going to that game? He's like, they asked, and I was like, he was like, he's like, I ain't going. He's like, it's like a 16-hour flight. He's like, how many movies you got to watch on that flight?
Oh, it's
He's
not
like,
that. It's not that bad. It's not 16 hours. It's not that bad.
I don't know what it was, but
No, it's
it might be
probably
12. I think it's 12.
probably
12.
total travel would probably be 12. Not sure if they're flying commercial or whatever. I doubt they are, just because it's such a long flight. I would say 12 hours for everything.
All right. Well, here
Um,
I got. I,
when do they get in?
yeah, I don't
How
know when
long
they're
are they
leaving.
there? Practice schedule, sleep patterns, and all of that. You got to
Yeah.
factor in. Of course, Georgia Tech has to do it too. So it's not
Yeah.
just
Right.
one
No,
team.
exactly.
But
It's just like when those teams go over
yeah,
and play in London and Germany and all
hmm
that stuff. All right. Well, let's throw this out here. Let's be devil's advocate. What happens if Florida State loses that game? Like, is it like panic mode? Is it
no,
like
I don't think so.
DJU? Like, it depends on, like, I guess,
Well, if
DJU throws
he,
3 picks and they lose, like, 28
yeah.
to 20 or something.
But
And
are
you're
you
just
ready
like,
to throw the freshman into the fire?
yeah, there's no way.
No,
I mean,
no,
I like Luke Kromenhoek. I think he's going to be a good player. I like
no,
Brock
no.
Glenn, but those guys,
Mm-mm. They're
if you
not
got to
ready.
play, if you got to play those guys,
hmm
you're in for a long year, in my opinion. So you can't just.
Hypothetically, if they lost to Georgia Tech, you would say, all right, we should be able to bounce back to BC unless it's just one. You're
Like,
not in Chestnut Hill, so you should be able to
yeah,
win that game. Going to Chestnut Hill is always a tough game for the Florida
yeah,
teams for some reason.
yeah,
Memphis, only way you lose to Memphis if it becomes a shootout. I still see them dominating Memphis, Cal, skip.
yeah,
SMU, like you say, SMU is the tricky one of the year for
yeah,
me, just
yeah.
because can you
And
score
we'll
enough
see. We'll
points?
kind of see. Yeah, exactly. We'll kind of
Yeah,
see what happened in that Georgia
yeah,
Tech game. Was it like an aberration? Is there problems? It's just.
yeah.
Yeah,
But if that
it'll be
defensive line gets off, it could be
right.
lights out quick in Dallas.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. That's why it's kind of an interesting
hmm
situation. Like that, I feel like their toughest game is the first one. You know,
Yeah,
in those first 5.
Yeah.
And so
And
before
but
Clemson, basically.
before, like, you're saying
Dallas.
that, it's gonna be the toughest game. People would be like, "Oh, they should beat Georgia Tech. They're more talented." But it's more to it than that.
Yeah.
You're not I believe you're not saying that just to say Georgia Tech's a better team. You're saying it because of everything they had to replace and get
Right.
used to, and game
Right. No,
situations,
exactly.
and stuff like that.
Well, no doubt. It's all those like intangible-ish type
Yeah.
things,
That most people don't
you
think
know.
about.
Yeah, right. And what I'll say is, again, Georgia Tech was, one of those teams that, they were early. That Louisville game was fun shootout week 1.
Mhm.
They lost to Ole Miss. They were a 7-win team. They shouldn't have beat you guys if Mario
Mhm.
takes the knee. But they got scrappy, in some nice games. Obviously it doesn't help that you got to play Georgia on the schedule either. So
Mhm.
that's pretty much a loss every year. So it's kind of they had a nice run. After they lost, after they beat you guys, they lost to Boston College, and they had 2 nice wins over
Mhm.
Carolina and Virginia. But then the good teams they played, Clemson took them to the woodshed,
Yeah.
and they beat a Syracuse team. But again, offensively they got better. They got their quarterback back. So how
Yeah.
much did they improve on that
Yeah. I
7 wins
mean, and
last year?
then no disrespect to JT, but if you're a decent quarterback, it's a lot easier throwing to the 3 guys he had last year versus
Yeah,
the
man.
guys this year.
I'm telling you, that's what people are like, dude. Keon Coleman was like that.
Mhm.
And for as much as I know Ricky bitched at Johnny Wilson,
Or even me
dude,
picking on Johnny,
yeah,
he's still
dude's still 6'7" and was catching
well.
balls,
And then I saw the other day, I saw either yesterday or the day before, he's fighting to be the number 3 guy on the Eagles team.
Yeah, exactly. You put him comboed with the Slim Reaper and AJ Brown. That's a nice that's some nice weapons Jalen Hurts has got up there.
Yeah, he's gonna get. Let's say he's gonna get a lot of one-on-one opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. And like, he's got a major mismatch with the height,
Mhm.
but and then even you throw in a Jaheim Bell who was just like a Swiss Army
Swiss
knife,
Army
dude.
knife.
He
Yeah,
was he was a problem. So
he truthfully was one of my favorite players. I said that last year. One of my favorite players to watch because he could just do a little everything. Sometimes last year I felt like they could have used him a little more in some situations, but you take a guy like that out and he's sitting there to, pick up an easy first down, a check down, or put him in the wildcat and put him in different places. Who's going to be that guy? Right
yeah.
now, I don't see that guy. But then again, if you got a Cam Davis, Tia Foley, and then
Yeah, because like I say,
Royale Williams.
like we said before, we both love Trey Benson too. So
Yeah.
again,
Oh yeah. We
I
don't even
loved
really
him.
talk about Trey Benson,
I loved that dude. He was
but
a
I
beast.
think their
No,
backfield is the
I
strength of the
think that's where
team.
they're probably the strongest because they've got some.
Other than the D line, their first 4. I wish Daryl Jackson was still at Miami, but their first 4 is really good. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting season for Florida State. I'm ready to watch that game because if they go out there and dominate Georgia Tech, then it's like, all right, oof,
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It's kind of they've had
yeah,
LSU. They've had LSU to start the season the last 2 years, where you're
hmm
like, okay, this is a big stick
hmm
game. This is a big measuring stick. Okay, this is the big bad LSU from the SEC, and they had the game 2 years ago in New Orleans where they get the missed extra point and all that stuff. Crazy ending. It was a tight game, back and forth. And then last year, it was just early. It was good, but like Florida State, you felt like they just weren't getting things going right, and then they just
right,
opened up the can. And
right,
what's crazy is, you'd love to see that game. Obviously, it's always going to be a game like that in the beginning of the year, but that's where you would have loved to see like a mid-season LSU
yeah,
Florida State game after
hmm
LSU kind of got clicking with those guys because hell, they did a good job. Their corners did a good job of slowing down Brian Thomas
yeah,
Jr., Malik Neighbors. I mean, Malik
hmm
Neighbors is up there. I've been wanting to ask Ricky, but he's been torching the Giants secondary up there in camp.
and fighting people.
Yeah.
I think he's been in a fight every day.
Well, I mean, he's putting head on neck and just
Yeah.
yee.
Well,
So
but like you said, that's what happens in that first game. You go back to last year's first game, how slow that offense was against the LSU game in the LSU opener, and then you get to that second half, and like you said, it's like a switch went on.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
JT was balling, Keon was
yeah,
getting loose, but
yeah,
Benson was toting it. It was just they all out blitzkrieg in that second half,
hmm
and LSU just Jaden Daniels and those guys couldn't get the offense going. So
hell, with a
credit to that.
defense like
That
that,
showed how good that showed how good Florida State kind of was right off the rip. So like what you're saying, if they come out and just smack Georgia Tech around. You'd be like, okay, this Florida State team's
Yeah.
pretty legit.
Like you said, it's a lot of questions going into this
Yeah,
year, on top of all the BS that's going on of them trying to leave the ACC.
yeah. That totally is like a sidebar thing that we've talked about it before too, with the bad deal of the ACC commissioner and then the presidents and
No,
all them.
no,
Just
no,
it's
no.
just
I
so
don't
bad.
think it. Hold on. Before you say it was a bad deal by the commissioner,
Well, it
it's
was everybody in the room who
right.
was the smartest guys.
It goes back to when Maryland left the conference and the whole conference panicked and said, all right, we got Virginia Tech, we got Miami, and we got Boston College to come in. Now Maryland is trying to bounce and go to another conference. And they said, we can't have this happen again. So I think at the time, Maryland only paid like 10 to 20 million to get out of the conference. So the conference came up with the deal. All parties involved agreed to the deal. It's a
Yeah,
locked deal. I mean, even if FSU gets out of it, just say hypothetically, if they get out of it, they need more than just them and Clemson to get out of this deal in order so they don't have to pay the I forgot what the grant of rights deal, which is until 2036. So even if FSU got, just say they got out of the deal, they still owe the ACC the grant of rights. So if they went to the Big Ten or SEC and they make the $80 million a year, half of that still has to go back to the ACC
yeah,
unless they get this deal somehow solved and whatnot. And I think just the way they've gone about it so far, it's just like, what are you guys doing? So you're just being vocal and stomping your feet and crying about it, because that's pretty much what they've been doing. And both commissioners from the Big Ten and the SEC are like, we don't
yeah,
want that.
yeah. We're that, and I think they're not looking to expand. They just did it. They both
No.
just expanded, and
Well,
they don't want to add more
right.
pieces to the pie.
Well,
That's
let's
one of
look
the
at it.
things.
Well, let's look at it from both conferences. Start off with the Big Ten. The Big Ten, 99.9% of the teams has that AAU accreditation,
Right.
which
Exactly.
basically
It's
is
which is about
academic.
educate which is the education side of things, not the football side.
Right. The only
Yeah.
team that doesn't have it in the conference is Nebraska. That
Right.
made sense geographically to get Nebraska into the
It made
conference.
sense. It made sense geographically, and because they're not a blue blood, but they are a blue blood. They're
Right.
an old school tradition, so that
Right.
made sense.
So them taking on FSU, they're they're thinking about that accreditation, and they're like, you know what, we're good. We got Oregon, we got Washington, and we got the two LA schools.
Yeah.
So right now they're sitting good. When you look at the SEC, if you're Florida, you're like, I don't want them in here.
Yeah.
Just like Clemson,
Yeah. No,
uh,
that they oh
South
yeah, they've
Carolina
put
doesn't want them in
both
the
South Carolina
SEC.
and Florida has put the kibosh. They don't want them in there.
Yeah. And people will say, "Oh, that's Florida." That's just business.
Yeah.
Why would I want them to come in our conference making the same amount of money? That
Exactly.
helps
We're
their
haters.
recruiting budgets.
Exactly. We're haters, bro. Like and
I
that's
mean,
it's
uh,
business and hater. Yeah, it is what
yeah,
it is. Like
yeah,
you should have got in the SEC 20 years ago,
yep.
Bobby. You didn't want to, Bobby.
Well, I don't think the SEC back
No,
then
I
is what
know.
it is
Well,
today,
well,
but
that's what I'm saying. It was more so that I remember talks like, would this was way back when we were probably kids,
mhm,
teenagers, when there wasn't really much realignment talk, but it was
no,
more so of like, would Florida State or would they be in the SEC or would they come to the
right,
SEC? Would they play in the SEC? Those type of talks. But it was never like, all right, there's going to be a transformation where there's going to be guys going all over the place.
right,
We didn't forecast that or
no,
see that, until a couple years ago. But yeah, it was more so, like Gator fans, like, yeah, I think it's actually funny that you're screwed right now, Florida State, that
yeah,
that you're not going to have the cash nor
mhm,
the resources like we do in the
mhm.
SEC with this whole TV deals. Like, yeah,
That's just
tough,
business.
tough
Sponge,
shit.
I don't think people want to admit that's just
No,
business and how business
guess
works.
what? Just saying what I said too. RIP to Big Bill, my dad. What did he always say about sports in general? It's great, but it's all about entertainment too.
Yeah,
It's a business. It is like
mhm,
it's not as scripted as WWE and
right,
movies and all that stuff, but it's all entertainment
right,
for you and me to pay our money
mhm.
to go to these games, for you and me to pay for these streaming
Well,
services or whatever.
but
And
think
it's
about the thing I sent the group about the Braves. I forgot the Braves and whoever playing at Bristol,
right,
a baseball game at Bristol. I would have never
right.
thought they would have played a baseball game at Bristol.
Yeah, well, how about they did the football game a couple years ago? So
Right.
those are two cool
Yeah.
things.
Mhm. Well, and back to the SEC thing, people are like, well, why North Carolina? Why Virginia? Because that's two markets the SEC is not in. That's a
And
whole nother
those are
market.
those accredited schools.
Right. They're in those markets. That's why Notre Dame, North Carolina, and Virginia are like the three that are out there that everyone wants. Because even I could even talk about Miami. If I'm the SEC, if I'm Florida, I don't want Miami in the SEC.
Right, right. Just
Plus,
like I don't want you or Florida State in there.
right, you already have the state locked down. Now for the Big Ten, Miami does have the AAU accreditation,
Right.
and the Big Ten. I doubt the Big Ten want Miami unless it's a package deal with other teams.
Yeah.
So right now it probably makes the most sense for Miami, Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina to go to the Big 12. Well, not North Carolina, but all the other schools to go to the Big 12.
Right.
I mean, it sucks, and you're making the same amount of money. So now Jim Phillips is sitting there saying, what do we do? And the schools are saying, what do we do? Well, Jim Phillips has pretty much put his foot down saying, we're going to fight tooth and nail. But hey, ACC fans, be mad at Jim Phillips because he's one of those commissioners that turned down the expanded playoff 2 years ago. So we could have had a 12-team playoff 2 years ago. Remember when the Pac-12
Yeah.
and the ACC were in
Yep.
cahoots and all of that, and they were the ones that shot down the whole playoff thing. So if they would have went through with it, Florida State would have been in the playoffs regardless last season.
Yeah.
So be mad at the conference commissioner who's screwing everyone over in the conference. Like I want Miami to get out of the ACC as well, but you
Right.
got to think going to the Big 12, does it make them better?
Right.
I don't really think so. I think it sets
Yeah.
them back.
Yeah. That, and it's like it comes down to the whole geography thing too. It's
Right.
just weird, and you got to make that.
Mhm.
You're making trips out to Kansas and Colorado and just random
Right.
places
I
like
mean,
that.
it's
Don't get me wrong,
probably
you still got to go to
shorter
then
Stanford
Chestnut
or
Hill or
Cal.
whatever. Right. Yeah, for sure. Oh, that too. Yeah. That's just
Well, Chestnut Hill's only a
I'll,
that's a 2-hour
I'll
flight to
never
Boston.
I'll never forget, it's like just get used to seeing Cal or Stanford in the freaking ACC.
No. I mean,
It's just
yeah, I mean USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington got to go to
no,
Rutgers. They got to go
that's
to
what I'm saying.
Piscataway.
By the way, LA is in California too,
It
by
is.
the way.
Yeah, by the way, Deshaun. I want one of those shirts though. We're
I
in
do
LA.
too. LA.
But yeah, I mean, if you're Florida State, it's I just I get wanting to get out because you had your year. Like this is not a slight. You had the best year you've had in a while, and it was perfect timing to push to get out of the conference. Because if you had a subpar year, what legs did they have to stand on to say we need to get out of the ACC?
Exactly. No, I
So
agree.
so
I
you're
agree with that.
kind of stuck. What do you do? Do you ride it out or do you keep fighting to get out? I mean, I'm sure, of course, we both heard the Greg Sankey interview talking about, oh, he doesn't want to get involved with teams that are in litigation and all of that. But I'm sure Florida State somehow finds a way to get out and have their rights to leave and all of that. Greg Sankey's going to be one of the first people to call them to say, hey,
Yeah,
what are we thinking? What's going on?
here's the thing. Here's the thing too. Like, it's for as much as we bag on Florida State, and it's still Bobby Bowden put that team on the map, and it made them a blue
A
blood,
brand.
a traditional power, a team that was always in the
Anytime,
mix,
any place, anywhere.
and basically they kind of lost the luster when Bobby retired, and then Jimbo took over, and it was just
Got
a
him a natty.
mess. I think that whole thing was just a mess in general, where if that marriage could have worked itself out between the whole back channels
Oh,
with the
yeah.
boosters and all that,
Mhm.
that really could have been a match made in heaven, but it didn't work out. It is what it is. And then when you tried to replace him, then it's been
With
a little
Willie.
bit chaotic. Exactly. So now
I
I think
think
you
that was a
got your
panic hire.
it probably was. And he was at a big time school out in Oregon. I don't, it's
Mhm.
crazy to think how he had that job too.
Yeah.
But
But
anyways,
I think if Mike could get
no, I
2 more solid years.
now I think now that you got your right young
Mhm.
coach, and he's brought the team back to relevance, back to to where you were in the playoff talk last year with just 4 teams, you went undefeated,
Yeah.
all that stuff. Now we've moved to the 12, so now you got more chances to get in there. So where
And make
do
more
you go
money.
from here? And like you said, do you put together a little 2 to 3 year run here with getting
Mhm.
recruits and portal guys, and can you make a run, get in the playoffs, and win the ACC championship, all that stuff. So yeah, it's basically it's time to
Well,
see what happens, and we'll just let all
well,
that
the other
transfer, realignment, let it
well,
take its course.
the other factor, Sponge, is people are not factoring in all the other sports.
Right.
If you're
No, for
if you're
sure.
the SEC
Yeah.
Big Ten, yeah, we get the football team. The basketball team's been decent, but Leonard's got to
Yeah.
at some point. Leonard's probably going to leave. The baseball team righted the ship this year,
Yeah.
but
They play pretty good ball.
outside of those three programs, name another really good. Well, the softball team's good too,
Yeah.
but they're not they're not winning national titles in other sports. So you got to
Right.
factor that in as well.
No,
Like
that,
if you're the Big Ten, we want you. We need you to be good at something else other
right.
than
No,
football.
that's definitely a factor for
I mean,
sure.
only
So
Vanderbilt could get away with that, but Vanderbilt's terrible at football and good at all the other sports.
yeah. And they're probably the highest educational value in the conference.
Tell me about it.
So but yeah. But like I say, we'll let the realignment talk and all that. Like I say, we're
Yeah.
just gonna have to play itself out, and we'll see what
Mhm.
happens if they move on from
Yeah.
the ACC. If they can get into Big 12, if they do
Mhm.
the Big 12, would they go to the Big 12? All that we'll just have to let
Yeah.
that play itself out. But
But back to on the field, I'm curious to see, Adam Fuller and Atkins, the OC and the DC, and see what they do this year, replacing a ton of guys. Because it's easy to call a defense when you got studs across the board, and
definitely,
but when you lose a couple people, how do you replace it? Like I say, if I'm Florida State, I'm going to see a lot of wildcat. I'm going to see a lot of guys fly jet sweeps and different things like that until some guys at wide receiver step up.
I agree, buddy. I agree. So, like I say, I think we both kind of have them pegged right around that 9-10, right where Vegas has them
Hmm.
in the over under. We both agree that it's going to be an interesting week one game, and we both think that, like I said, we know what the tough games are on the schedule. So now it's time for these new faces, DJU included, to
Yeah,
step up and be the guys they can be, or they're not. It's
yeah.
just
That five.
put or shut up time. And like I say,
I mean,
what's great?
looking at that schedule again, that five stretch. SMU, Clemson, Duke, Miami, North Carolina, and Notre Dame.
Yeah,
It's going to come down to depth and health. The depth is the
no,
question.
that's the whole
That's the
other
question.
aspect of the thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, dude. Like prime example today, CJ Baxter, one of the biggest top running backs in the country,
Yeah.
out for the year.
And then
Torn knee.
yesterday, Montreal with the
Yeah,
injury.
Montreal out. Yeah, that was literally, after we recorded. It was just
Yeah.
like Montreal's out with a meniscus, had the scope done. Whatever. Like they're talking coming back. Like he's out for 6 weeks.
Yeah. Next
Um,
man up.
but yeah,
That's all
that's
it
what I'm
is
saying.
next man up.
No, that's what I'm saying. So when you have some of these, but CJ Baxter is one of those big name guys where you're
Yeah.
expecting this kid on a
Hmm.
top 5 team. So we're going to see more. There's going to be plenty of more guys that are going to go down. So now
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just
You don't want
who,
to see it, but that's just
right?
the reality of
Yeah,
football.
you definitely don't want to see it before a game's even kicked off yet. That's what really sucks.
Yeah.
These preseason injuries are the worst. Where you're like, damn, such high hopes for the season, you don't even get in season yet, and you're out.
Hmm.
So yeah, here's the good part. Florida State and Georgia Tech is week 0, baby. So
Was
we
that two
literally
weeks, two,
2
3
weeks,
weeks
buddy.
away?
It's 2 weeks because we've lined it up here. We've had the Gator talk last week, FSU breakdown today, and we'll be bringing you the Canes next week,
Yes,
and then we
sir.
roll right into week 0, baby. Week 0 is the following week, and then it's Florida Miami, baby. So like I say,
Yeah.
it's here. It's
Are
here. The
there any
next
other
3
games
weeks.
week 0 other than Florida
Yeah,
State, Georgia
there is.
Tech?
Let me pull it up right now. There's a couple
I'm
games
sure
that
it's probably USC and San Jose
yeah,
State or whatever, their usual week 0
yeah,
game.
yeah, it's not anything super
It's probably
attractive.
like 5, 6 games.
We get to
That's
see
usually the
we
high school weekend too for
we get to see
ESPN.
that SMU team play. They're playing Nevada at Nevada
Okay. Okay.
on that Saturday. That's the night game.
Mhm.
The other afternoon game is Montana State at New Mexico. Really care less about that one. And then if you want to stay up until 11:59 Eastern time, midnight, you can watch Delaware
Hawaii.
State at Hawaii.
Yeah. So the
So
Florida
yeah,
State games is it Saturday or Sunday?
it's a Saturday at noon.
Oh yeah, because they're in Ireland, so that's
Exactly.
6
So
hours. That's a
yeah,
night game over there.
Saturday, August 24th, Florida State Georgia Tech, noon kickoff. Like I say, and then you'll have, then we'll have that next Thursday will be like your official week one, all
Yeah.
those Thursday night
Okay.
games, and then that's your Florida Miami week 1 week. So yeah,
Awesome.
we'll be back at it next week with the Canes talk. We'll break down the Canes. We talked a little bit about the Canes last week, we're talking about the Gators, but we'll break down fully what we think of Mario Cristobal's squad next week and see where we
Hmm.
think the over under on what their win total will be and where the Canes will go this year. So like I say, it's been fun rapping about the Knowles today. So go
Yeah.
Knowles, Rick. Go
Yeah.
Knowles. Go Knowles,
Shout
buddy.
out to everyone that listened to the Gator breakdown last week. Hey, like, subscribe. Hey, send us a message.
Yeah, holla
Tell
at
us
your
to talk
boys.
about. Tell us to
Holla,
talk about more. Yell at me again about
yell at
hating on your
Floro.
Gators. I
Yell.
get a little couple messages
7
about the
wins.
Gators.
7 wins.
Yeah, boy, them orange and blue lenses are wild. But
I
yeah,
didn't
so
I didn't say 10-3, baby. I said 7 wins. But no.
yeah,
No, yeah. Holler at us. Hit us up, man. Let us know if you hate or dislike or love the show. And like I said, we'll be back again next week talking about the Miami Hurricanes. So we appreciate all y'all, and we'll holler at you.